So today we're going to talk about hiring and being hired for technical writers. Before we start, before we get into it, let's just talk a little bit about me. This is me. I'm a technical writing manager at Big ID. I've been at this company for 3 years, but I started my technical writing career in 2008. I worked in lots of different companies on many different technologies, from fiber to 3D printing, robotics, quantum computing, data, and more. I've worked in-house as a contractor, as an outsourcer. So I've seen a lot, I've done a lot. I also wrote an ebook on how to hire a technical writer, which you can find on my website. So you can just go to www.ycarp.com and download it from there. I don't ask for any details or any personal information. It's free. It's just a PDF download. The only thing I collect is download statistics, but they're all anonymous. So you can go and get it from there if you like. And in any case, I apologize because I couldn't find a professional picture of myself. So I found this picture of me when I was in Rome a year and a half ago. So I wasn't sure if this was appropriate or not for this forum. So I put this one up. But I have other ones that I could show you. These are my other pictures from the trip. So in any case, so what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about hiring and being hired, and hopefully the main takeaways will be that you'll get some information about the hiring process from both perspectives, as a hiring manager and as a candidate, and maybe we can share some ideas for approaching the process of hiring and being hired. Okay, so that's the intro. What is the process? So I broke down the process into these steps. So there's a lot to discuss about hiring and being hired. Basically, the steps depend on uh, on uh, on you, right? On your style and on your needs. But basically, these are the steps. You got to write a position description. You got to review CVs. You got to interview candidates. You have to give them a test usually, and then you decide whether to go ahead with the candidate or not. So I can't cover all of these issues in only 1 hour. So what I decided to do was to focus on maybe some of the things that are not discussed a lot in other, in other forums, just so that we can focus on some, slightly different aspects of the process. So one of the things that is near and dear to my heart is the position description, because the position description is actually where you decide who you're looking for before you actually start the hiring process. Okay, so just saying that you want to hire a technical writer because you've got too much work on your plate, right? It's not enough. Okay, you really have to define the role in detail, and you have to figure out what your pain point is. Like, why are you hiring this person, and what skills do you need to hire for? And this is an extraordinarily important step. Whenever I've hired people, writing the position description was actually the most helpful part of that, because without knowing the persona of the person you're going to hire, like what they're actually going to be doing in their day-to-day job, is without knowing that, you're not really going to be able to hire the right person, because you don't know who the right person is, right? So what is the purpose of the position description in general? So one of the aims of the position description is to scare candidates away, because you want people to read the position description and say, oh, gee, that doesn't sound like that doesn't sound like something that I could do, or oh, I'm not qualified for that, or I'm overqualified for that, or I don't like the sound of that. Oh, that sounds like way too much work. Uh, I'd rather do something that is less demanding. Oh, they say that the company is a fast-paced company. That doesn't really suit me too much. Um, so people kind of self-select out. I have I had an experience um, where I wrote in the position description for a senior technical writer that that I needed someone who could be like uh, take initiative and come up with ideas and move forward and work towards goals. And I wrote all those kinds of words, uh, and I ended up interviewing someone who was completely the opposite of what I was looking for, because he didn't self-select out, and uh, from his CV, he looked very qualified, but he was working in a company where they do a release once a year. Um, Everything is pretty much the same year on year. He didn't really have any initiative. He didn't really do anything different. It was just the same after the same after the same. And if he had read the position description just a little bit more closely, maybe he would have self-selected out, which would have been much better for me, because then I wouldn't have had to waste my time as a manager interviewing someone who is obviously not right for the role.
Um,
Also,
oh, it's just
yeah,
a question. So when you're actually writing the CV though, like how much so you define the description, like how much of it is like concrete? Is there like when you write it yourself, you say, okay, the person has to have like 5 years experience. They need to have experience with Markdown, whatever. Like how flexible are you on it? Like, do you put in like an extra buffer? So you say, okay, well maybe I'll get some people for 3 years experience, or maybe this person wants to learn Markdown but doesn't really know it yet, or maybe they haven't used, or they learned about it but they haven't used it. Like when you write the description, I mean, is the description your ideal candidate, or like nice to have, or do you even define it and break it down within the description itself? Like these are the must-haves, the nice-to-haves, and like advantages and things like that.
yeah. So the last thing that you said was is my preferred method. So what I do is I break it down into mandatory and nice to have, and in the next section we'll talk about years of experience. But I would break down the position description into mandatory, and mandatory should really be mandatory. In other words, if this person does not know um, how to write release notes, or does not know HTML, if that's important for you, right? And that's mandatory, and they don't know that, then uh, then they uh, then they should not be interviewed, right? They should know that themselves from reading the position description. They shouldn't even apply, right? But um, uh, but for sure, a nice to have section is great, because it really makes the candidates feel like, oh, they've got something extra to bring to the table. So even though I don't actually really need them to know Markdown, I could teach them Markdown, in a day or two, right? So for my needs, let's say. But if they already know it, then I'm saying, okay, great. I don't have to spend time teaching that person how to write in Markdown. So definitely breaking it up into sections like that is the best way to do it. Um, yeah. So you were talking about term, like how long their experience is. So that's the next section in the position description. You really need to provide useful information, right? So a rough guide for years of experience. in my opinion, and other people might have a different way of looking at it, is that if you're looking for a junior technical writer that's 1 to 3 years of experience, um, or 0 to 3 years of experience, actually, a mid-level technical writer will be like 3 to 5 years, and a senior technical writer will be over 5 years. But I mean, this is flexible depending on you and on this issue. Um, but but if you just say in your position description, I'm looking for a senior technical writer, it doesn't really help you because uh, because I bet you that if I went around uh, to all the participants in this Zoom now, and I asked them, what's your title, right? I would get technical writers, senior technical writers, information managers, technical communicators, and so on and so forth. So just saying that you need a senior writer doesn't really help you because it doesn't really indicate how many years of experience. Okay, so writing how many years of experience you need is important, and that just to uh, helps you to narrow down the list of candidates, right? Who actually apply because they'll self-select out if they don't have that many years of experience. One would hope. Um, you can also ask for domain experience, like do they, have they worked in, cyber before, or do they know anything about, you know, um, you know, data storage or whatever it is that your company does. And also, you can mention the types of documentation. If you're looking for someone who is specifically skilled at API documentation, then say it. Okay. But if you're looking for someone who is is going to be writing user guides and user documentation, then say that. Okay. Don't assume that just because you're looking for a technical writer, they can do everything that you need to fill the pain point. Um, okay, so the next point is something that I really enjoyed preparing for this presentation because it took me a little while to write this fantastically uh, uh, uninformative sentence that doesn't really say anything, but I've seen words and phrases like this in position descriptions all over the place. And actually, one of the things I do in my job is I review position description that HR is planning on sending out, and I take out all of these words because they don't really mean anything. They don't give any information. All it does is uh, uh, waste your time um, by making you read stuff uh, that doesn't even make you look good because there's no synergy. All right. Um, okay. And the last thing is don't insult candidates, right? Because um, because if you were hiring a surgeon, you wouldn't say to a surgeon, you wouldn't say in the position description, must have steady hands, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. So you're not going to ask for, a good speller or someone with excellent typing skills because you assume that anyone who is planning on being planning um, applying for a technical writer position, right, would have these kinds of uh, experience skills. And the reason why I don't put them in is because uh, it's just it's just a waste. It's just a waste of time. Okay, and writing a position description is just like writing any other technical document. To be honest, where you have to know what information to put in and what information to leave out. So this is not really much different from writing user documentation, right? Uh, at least in my opinion, I think that knowing what to put in and what to leave out is key, so that you get the best candidates applying for the job that you can possibly get. Of course, there are going to be those candidates like the one I mentioned before who don't really read it. They just see that there's a company that's looking for a technical writer, and they're just going to apply for it anyway. But you can't help that. Does anyone here have any thoughts on position descriptions, on anything I've said?
No, my only feedback would be, yeah, just make sure you read them because again, when I was hiring, I've had so many people just completely ignore them. Like one person sent to me like things like her experience was like a Udemy certificate that was like a 2-hour technical writing course. I was like, well, that's just not going to cut it. So yeah, I would emphasize the point of reading the position description.
Right.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to filter out or to to really decide what you're looking for. So it's nice that it forces you as the hiring manager as well. So you mentioned that, but yeah, it's I think it's really one of the best ways to do that. I also, again, you have to pass it through HR usually, and so you have to be careful with them to make sure that they don't start throwing in all the corporate stuff. Like we're a fun, family-oriented company where you won't see your family anymore because you're working 25 hours a day and things like that. So yeah, you have to. There's always the politics with them, but yeah. So be careful.
Yeah. Hi. I also think while it's very good to self-filter based on the description, I think another thing that we need to clue in on is giving the number of years of experience, or not even the number of years, but the description of, oh, we need a junior writer or whatever, is also an indication for us of what the budget is for that position. That they may write junior needs 5 years of experience, which means they want someone with much more experience, but they're not willing to pay for it. We have to also be aware of these intricacies, these nuances.
Right. It's like reading between the lines, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
But how do you prevent HR, which normally in a large company, the resumes, the CVs go through HR before they get to you, and HR sometimes takes your description as such a strict criteria, you could miss a good candidate that's, doesn't have one of the 8 different things that were listed, but otherwise they'd be perfect candidate, and HR just goes by the checklist. And
yeah, so I've had this issue actually in a previous company, and typically like what the flow was for us was so let's say 100 candidates apply, and so they go into I think it was Commit was the program, and so you would get these candidates, and I, as the hiring manager, I would get first dibs on it. So like I would see, and then I would say, okay, this person looks okay, and then pass it to HR. There were these ambitious HR people who would go in earlier and try to filter them out, and so I had to actually go back and make sure that what they filtered was okay. And to be honest, most of the time the HR people had enough sense. But yeah, so I think it depends on what application you're using, like what sort of hiring application you're using. But typically, at least what I've done in the past was I filtered them out myself. And like I responded very quickly. So as soon as I got like a little notification, I would jump in and then look right away. One, to beat HR, and 2, because I don't want like the candidate waiting. And so if HR does get to it first, usually I think there's a way that you can kind of see what they've done afterwards. So you can see the people they've rejected. The one caveat is you have to make sure that when they reject a person, it doesn't send that automatic email, because if that happens, then you're kind of screwed, because then that means like the HR person hit reject and they got this email, automatic email saying, you've been rejected, and no candidate's going to want to speak to you then. So you can request that HR, if they're going to send out that automatic email anytime they reject somebody, that they put on like a 2-day or something, or a 24-hour window before the email is sent, and that way you can kind of work around it.
Aren't you defeating the purpose of if HR has somebody whose job is recruitment? Aren't you basically defeating his or her job, and just you're going to get swamped in a large corporation. There'll be hundreds and hundreds of CVs, and somebody has to filter them out first. And then also you have nowadays they're using AI to filter them out, so you have to hit the buzzwords and the keywords, and
Yeah, so
it's not in our control.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. So with I guess with my experience with at least with technical writers, is HR doesn't have much experience with them, so they're a bit hesitant to get involved in it anyway. But I
I
don't
have the
know.
same experience. I have the same experience, Gidi, that when I was hiring, I had positions open for two writers at some point, and they basically passed the whole responsibility on to me because they don't understand technical writers, and we'll get into that later on when we talk about go no go, whether to trust HR or not, but HR knows how to hire a software engineer or a product manager way better than they know how to hire a technical writer. So in my case, they basically asked me to review uh, every single CV that came in. Um, uh, uh, if you break down your position description into mandatory and nice to have, then and if your mandatory really is mandatory and not just nice to have plus, so in that case, uh, you're going to make it easy for everybody, for HR also, right? They can say, okay, this guy does not have experience using Flare, and that's a mandatory item on the position description. So then we're going to say no. That's it, done, and that's easy.
I see David has his hand up. Like I just interrupt, so
Yeah. No,
Dave's-
yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, no, I see that's more the dynamic, which is one way of doing it. So, I mean, I would have more to say, but in the interest of getting Yossi, turning it back to Yossi, I want to mention that I think that years of experience can actually be very. I think that it could be a real conundrum. I think that I've come in contact with writers who, I mean, look, everyone. I've met people who are 25 years old who their title is senior technical writer, and sometimes you get, but that doesn't necessarily belie the fact that you could have a very multivariated experience, as opposed to, let's say, someone who's senior, who has, let's say, spent 10 years editing someone else's release notes, and they may be very good at it, but they may lack their seniorness may belie their lack of experience in other areas like UX, UI, API, and et cetera, et cetera. So I just my point being that even years of experience, I think you need to dig down to and find out what those years were spent doing, and that sometimes less can be more.
Yes, absolutely, good points. Okay, shall we move
You can
on?
take my hand down. I'll lower my hand. There we go.
I wanted to say that two things. One, I know you said that if HR sends a rejection letter to the person who won't speak to you, you are wrong. If somebody's looking for a job, they'll be very happy to hear you say, listen, you got an email by mistake. I'm still interested in your candidacy. I don't think anybody's going to hold it against you. And the second thing is, oh, sure, now I forgot what it was going to be. Sorry. No, okay.
All right.
Sorry.
Okay, if you remember later, you can always chime in. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to the next slide, which is actually the CV itself. Now, when you're talking about CVs, so there is so much to say. There you can spend hours and hours and hours talking about how to write CVs and how to evaluate CVs. But if you've sent out a position description and the result of that is that you get CVs into you. Now, when you review those CVs, how do you know who to move forward with on the basis of the CV only? Because that's all you've got, right? You don't have any other data. All you have is this document that they sent you. So as technical writers, it's kind of easier for us to evaluate a person's skills based on their CV than it might be for other positions, right? So if I was a software engineer applying for a job and I had a typo on my CV, so it wouldn't necessarily disqualify me from the job. But if I'm a technical writer and I've got typos, or my structure is the structure of my CV is not logical, or I've got consistency issues with styles or something like that, then that's a big problem, right? That can easily help you figure out like who a reasonable candidate might be. Okay, so firstly, you look at the quality. Maybe not firstly, but you look at the quality, and so you look at the typos and structure and clarity and that kind of thing, and you also look at skills and experience, right? You make sure that they meet your mandatory criteria, and hopefully also some of the nice to haves. And then you look at the work history. So this is kind of a controversial thing, because someone might have gone in and out of the industry. You might have been a technical writer and then you moved over to some other job, or you've taken a break and then you've come back to it. I mean, does that really mean that the person is not going to be a good candidate? I don't know. It really depends on the individual case, I suppose. If someone has been in the same company for 20 years and they haven't done anything else except be in their position for 20 years in that company, that could be just as much of a red flag as someone who job hops every year. So you have to take each one on its own merits, but looking at the CV, I mean, you've probably all heard this, that the CV is like your shop front, right? It's showcasing you. It's the most important document that you'll ever write, in terms of job applications, right, or career, and so therefore you want to make it as high quality as possible. Now, as a hiring manager, sometimes I don't even read the CV at all. I just look at it. I don't even read the words. I just look at it, and I can put aside a CV and say I'm not even interested in reading this person's skills and experience if it looks something like this. Okay, this is way too dense. It contains way too much information. It's too much work for me. I don't really want to read a resume that is that looks like this, because I know that the person on the other end of this CV is not doesn't understand how to filter information, how to decide which information to include or exclude, especially when you consider that it's only the first page, and this was the second page of this CV. And I apologize if anyone on this call is the owner of the CV. I did my best to blur out all the information, but just looking at the CV from a bird's eye view, it's just not the kind of person I want to hire. So I would just straight away put this aside and go on to the next one. If you're getting 150 CVs for every job, then you can't waste time on this. And so this is a good point for every hiring manager and for every candidate to take into account as well. Does anyone have any comments about CV layout?
Yeah. So no, just Elisa raised the issue of loyal employees, basically. So employees that have been around, like I can tell you when I was hiring, and I got CVs from people who worked at Intel for between 10 and 20 years. Like HR would immediately flag it as be suspicious of this person. Like maybe they wouldn't say no immediately, but they would flag it, saying, this person probably got comfortable in their position. They stayed way too long. They didn't learn a lot of things. Like they didn't innovate. these are all assumptions, I'm not supporting this, but yeah, so it's sort of annoying when you see somebody who stayed at a job and stayed loyal, and like if they stay over 5 maybe or 8 10 years for sure, yeah, HR starts to view that as like something negative. It's really weird, but yeah, I've seen it a lot. They immediately flag it as they don't say no like as an immediate rejection, but they flag it as be suspicious because it sounds like this person wasn't looking to move ahead or something.
But if you're in a company like Intel, that you could switch, if not your position, you switch projects every 2 years, and you could have a huge amount of experience. But because Intel paid you enough to stay, but that doesn't mean you didn't have a wide range of experiences.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this also goes back to it's HR really doesn't know the technical writing field. And so, they make a lot of assumptions that they apply the same sort of logic that they would apply to hiring a software engineer. Like maybe a software engineer working at Intel, maybe they didn't start learning the latest libraries or things like that. And so they're out of date. But again, that's a bit of assumption as well. And so I've seen HR people penalize candidates because they were out of place for too long. So try to jump jobs every 2 years. That's my suggestion. No.
Well, that also goes to structure of your CV, because if you structure your CV so that every new project that you work on at Intel, let's say, is another little section on your CV, right? Like as if it's like another job. So it might come off better than if you say, well, when I was at Intel for 20 years, I worked on these 10 projects, right? So maybe if you structure the CV in a way that it looks like you had a lot of different experiences there rather than just putting in a couple of bullet points, then that might help your.
That's great. That's the opposite of what I've seen of very junior people who've taken anything they've ever done in their lives and written it as being involved with documentation. Was the documentation something at Burger King? The other thing I was going to mention, by the way, when you said people should self-eliminate when they see that it doesn't, their background doesn't match the requirements. People with very little experience will still apply to jobs that say require 5 years experience because they have nothing to lose. They're looking for an entry job, or they're very junior. There aren't enough junior jobs out there. They will apply and hope you like them or hope that you're willing to work with them. So don't expect not to see junior people unless you write, please do not apply unless you have at least 3 years experience. That kind of thing, which might be a turnoff for them.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. Okay. Does anyone have any other comments about either evaluating CVs or content of CVs before we move on to the next part? All right.
I have a question. You said that CV that you showed is a turnoff. What would you eliminate if you had that kind of experience? If you had 20 years of experience and you worked in 7 or 8 different jobs over those 20 years, which would you eliminate? Would you eliminate the oldest ones? Would you eliminate the ones that are least relevant? What would you do with that kind of to improve that kind of CV?
Yeah.
The one that you showed as an example.
Okay, so the first thing I would do is I would probably get rid of skills and accomplishments. It's like half a page of very small font text. But in terms of the actual professional experience section, I would probably go back to the last four jobs, maybe till 2017, let's say. And then before that, I would say also worked as a technical writer in these companies, and just do like a bullet list rather than he's got here additional career history, which is pretty good in terms of in terms of, you know, giving that information in like a very short in a short format. So I would just do that more for every job that's like older than, like, I don't know, like 10 years old. So that's
Good.
that's one of the things I would do. And also technical awareness and organizational skills and, you know, international exposure. I don't know really how relevant those things are, but the thing with a CV is that you want to leave some mystery in the CV. So so you want the people who are you want the hiring manager to read the CV and say, oh, this guy looks interesting, or this person looks interesting. I want to interview them and find out more about them. And then you've got all this stuff that you've got here on the right hand side under skills and accomplishments. That's all the stuff that you can talk about in the interview. And actually, I should have prepared this for the for this presentation, but I don't do this anymore. But I did at one point um, have on my CV a right hand column for every job that I went for. Oh, sorry, for every job that I listed, I put a little box next to it, and I said lesson learned, right? And I gave a like a one phrase, one like like 5 words about what lessons I learned from working at that job, and that would be a great way to start a conversation with the hiring manager, because it would say, oh, you say that your lesson learned for this job is hard work pays off. What do you mean? You know, what hard work did you do and how did it pay off? And now they've got a question to ask you, which you're well prepared for because it's your story, right? And you can launch into a conversation about that. And it's great for you as a candidate because you're basically giving them the questions to ask you. And it's great for the hiring manager because they don't have to think of questions to ask you. So you know, things like that. You know, leave some mystery, give them something to want to know more about you, right? So way too much information here. There are too many bullet points for each job, uh, and so those are things that I would try to contract on this CV.
That's really a brilliant idea. That's really a brilliant idea, Yossi, having the check boxes saying lessons learned. You know, once upon a time, this is a true confession. I had a CV. I had something like this, and this was years ago. A career coach looked at it, and just told me very gently, very nicely. She said, "Dave, this is not your CV. This is your biography. Fix it." And that was a lesson. That was a lesson learned.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you publish the biography? Can I buy it somewhere?
I would also add that
I think that it would be your next. It would be your next bad example. So no. Sorry.
I think a lot of times, like, you know, with people with like a lot of experience now, you can instead of highlighting all the things you did at a company, just highlight the cases where you made an impact on the business. So maybe like documentation reduced support tickets by 30%, like tangible things like that. Introduced videos and reduced onboarding time, you know, things like that. And that way, like, you don't have to mention, you know, I wrote release notes, I updated APIs, but rather you can give them something tangible to kind of to judge by. And that way you can keep it, you know, fairly short.
What about summarizing what the company does so that other companies will see whether it's relevant to their business? You have experience in anything that they're working with.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's I just my fear would be, you know, just because of the, like, I try to keep it on like a one pager. So and in some cases, like if you worked at like Intel or like Palo Alto or something like that, like, so let's say Palo Alto, for example, and you're applying for other cybersecurity jobs, like they all know the name Palo Alto. So I think you have to take it like on a case by case example, and also keep in mind just how much space you have. Because a lot of times I think the hiring managers will know the companies, at least in Israel, because it's a fairly small country. So
Right. And speaking of space, we probably should get a move on, if you don't mind, to the next slide.
Yossi, can I ask a question? Sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt you again.
Yeah,
But
sure.
I wasn't sure whether to bring this up, but someone brought it up in the chat, so I'm going to say it anyway. In terms of people, you said people, we were talking about people applying even if they don't fit, but there are people who apply who underestimate themselves, and especially I think it applies to women. Is there anything that you do about that, or a person can do about that to improve themselves?
So you're talking about someone who feels like they're not qualified for the job, but they're tempted to apply for the job anyway. What they should do about it? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, yes, but do you do anything like as a hiring manager to try and make I don't know,
To identify
try and get the best people who are not necessarily willing to put themselves forward, especially women I'm talking about, I think it's sort of quite well known. I don't know how true it is. People seem to think it's true that women are less willing to put themselves forward.
Well, look, you have to take every CV on a case-by-case basis. I mean, personally, I don't. I hope anyway. I don't discriminate based on the person's name or their gender when I'm reviewing CVs. I don't really know how to answer that question. If if someone writes a CV like they're not very confident about themselves, then I really, unless I'm looking for someone who's particularly not confident, I don't really know how I can hire someone like that. I'm not really sure how to answer that question. I don't know.
I think what he's referring to, correct me if I'm wrong, please. Men tend to see a list of, say, 10 qualifications, and if they have 6 of them, they will definitely send in their CV. While women will go, oh my God, I've only got 9 out of the 10 qualifications.
Oh, I see.
I don't think I can apply for this position.
Right.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, from a hiring manager perspective, I can't do anything about that. You either apply or you don't apply. I mean, it's up to the candidate to decide whether they want to apply or not. I'm not really
I
sure.
think maybe you can state here, would you rather that someone not apply if they've got if they don't have some of the qualifications, or is it a wish list, and if someone has got 70% of the qualifications or 60% of the qualifications, please send in your CV because they may be things that we're willing to work with. In other words, just get out there. You as a hiring manager would like to see from your applicants.
Right. So
there
again,
are women here in the forum, so we want to hear.
Okay. So again, I'll just I'll repeat what I said before, because I think that's the only answer I have to this, really, is that in a position description, if you say that that something is mandatory, then make sure that it actually is mandatory. So if I require certain skills or certain kinds of experience, then that should be mandatory, and everything else should be under nice to have. So therefore, if anyone applies, doesn't matter who they are, and they don't fit into the mandatory requirements, then then I can't go forward with their application. And if you're strict about it, then then that's the way it is. I mean, if something is somewhere in between nice to have and mandatory, then put it under nice to have. Because if you're willing to work with someone who doesn't have those specific skills, right? So let's just say I'm looking for an API writer, and I need them to be an expert in writing APIs. So the mandatory skill is can document APIs, right? And if I don't see any API experience on their CV, then I'm not going to interview them. Doesn't matter who they are, right? But if I need someone who's got API experience and user guide experience and microcopy experience, so I won't put it under mandatory. I'll put it under, has some experience with, right, or something like that. And that way, I'll be able to filter out the people, um, who I think are, good applicants and who are not good applicants. That's the only way. That's the only answer I have for something like that. So if you're not confident that you meet the criteria, you don't lose anything by sending your CV. Frankly, right? You can only get, but yeah.
Yossi, yeah, I don't know. Do you want to keep going? Like we have like 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
Also, just for the sake of improving, these meetups, I'll put in a link for leaving feedback, like an anonymous survey. So feel free to, I tried to send it out the meetup in the meetup emails, but the meetup program doesn't work that well. So not everybody got the email. So I threw it in the chat now. So feel free to leave whatever feedback you have. It's anonymous, it's not collecting emails or anything. So feel free to just wail on me or Yossi or whatever. But yeah, so it's in the Zoom chat. So if you want to leave whatever feedback so we can improve, go ahead. And sorry, yeah, Yossi, go for it.
Okay. Well, so the next point is the interviews. Okay. So what can you learn from an interview? And I'm talking here about not a technical interview, just an interview with a person. So really, what you're looking for is someone who you'd be happy to share an office with, right, on a day-to-day basis, right? Does their personality match the culture of your team? Are they curious? Can they describe your product? Can they describe things that they have documented before, right? Did they look up your company? Can they describe what your company does? Okay. I once interviewed someone who, every time I asked him a question, he would say, "That's a very good question," and then he would answer a completely different question that I didn't ask, which was very frustrating, actually, because I couldn't actually get him to answer the questions that I was that I want to know the answers to. So so really you got to figure out, like, the person, right? And interviewing is really hard because some people interview really well and then they turn out to be terrible writers, and some people don't interview well at all, but they're actually really good at their jobs. So it's pretty hard to do this. I think this goes across the board for not just for technical writers, but for everybody, because interviewing is a skill, and it's difficult. I like to have a conversation. I think there are people on this call who I hired, and I think they'll agree that when we had our interview, more like a conversation rather than a question answer, because I like to figure out whether, would I like to sit down and have lunch with this person, or can I can't stand, this kind of personality. It doesn't fit with my company culture or group culture or whatever. So that's what you can learn from a non-technical.
I would add one point, which is keep in mind, know your audience, basically. So, typically we have an interview with maybe a technical writer manager, or maybe a product manager, depending on the size of the company. So, like a technical writing manager has one set of KPIs that they're looking for. A product manager has another set of KPIs. So don't talk about how you can reduce the amount of words in a sentence to a product manager, or a customer success manager or a customer support manager who might interview you. They want to reduce tickets. They want to reduce onboarding time. They have certain business KPIs. So just modify your interview to speak to the relevant audience. So try to look who they are. Look them up on LinkedIn, see what their job is, see what interests them. Stalk them, find out how many kids, animals they have, all that stuff, and then try to try to identify what KPIs that they care about, and then in your interview, speak to that. So you say, hey, my documentation reduced the amount of tickets the support agents got by 30%. So that's one thing I would recommend doing. As just look at who you're interviewing for, and then apply your. Don't give the same interview for every person.
I actually went for a job at a large company. I'm not going to say which one, but I went for a job at a large company, and the person interviewing me basically lifted up my CV and just started asking me, where I worked and what years I worked there, and it became such a tedious conversation that he wasn't going to learn anything about me. So I'd already decided that I wasn't really that interested in working there. But I was sitting in this interview and I thought to myself, all right, let's make this more interesting and turn it around. So I started asking him questions about him.
Outside, I'm in.
And I started asking him questions about himself, and started asking him about what his team does, and we got into a whole discussion about technical writing and the philosophy of technical writing and all this kind of stuff. And basically I turned the whole conversation around, and he said to me afterwards that he thought that my interview was the best interview he'd ever done, and he must be getting really good at giving interviews now. So that was fun. Okay, so the next slide is.
Well, I just wanted to say one other thing. Sorry, I know that we're running out of time, but I never used to do this. I used to just want to be as appropriate as possible for like the most desirable candidate for whoever it was that was interviewing me. But I think that as I've gotten older, I've learned a lot, and I think it's very important to come equipped with some questions. In other words, not only to do your research to know the company, but to come up with questions that you want to ask, and also to treat it that you are as that you're equals. They're interviewing you for a position, and you are interviewing them to see if you want to work with them. And I think that it's important to have that wind underneath your wings, and also important to get the information that you need because you want to make a good choice if it comes to that.
Yeah, you're right. It's your career, and you want to know if you're if you want to spend your time there as an employee. That's absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so what can't you learn from an interview? You can't learn if they're a good technical writer or not. I've interviewed so many people who interviewed so well. Wow, that was so great in the interviews. I came away from these interviews thinking, okay, I found the right person for the job. They're amazing. I'd love to have this person on my team. They're smart. They're curious. They ask great questions. They've prepared. They're prepared. They really want this job. It's great. And then I give them a test, and I get back, garbage. Sorry to use that word, but that's basically what I got back, and it was very, very disappointing. Disappointing. So you can't learn if they're a good technical writer from the interview, which is something that you have to keep in mind because the interview really is only about personality, and I mean you can ask technical questions as well, but I'm not talking about a technical interview. I'm talking about just like the initial interview. All right, so we only got a few minutes, so let's talk about the test. So in the test, you want to test if the candidate has the skills that you need. Make sure that you base the test on what they would be doing. Okay, and what I mean by that is take something that was take a topic that maybe someone had already written an article about or a document about, one that is not publicly available, and then give the candidate bullet points, for example, that will give them some background information, and then ask them to write up that document and see how well they do. Obviously, you have to give them enough information to be able to do that, but don't get them. I once went for a job where I was asked to write about something about Thailand and islands in Thailand, you know, if I don't remember exactly what it was, but it had nothing to do with anything, and it was a waste of time. It just tested if I could put some words together, but it wasn't really relevant. So so make sure that the test is relevant. Set time limits. I like to give a week for a test that might take them a couple hours to do, because I don't want them to feel pressured. And I always tell my candidates, I'm more interested that you get it done on time rather than early. But if you want to send it to me early, that's fine. But if you send it to me by the deadline, like before the deadline, I'm happy. If it's at the last minute, if it's before the deadline, that's fine. I'd rather get quality than speed. And then it's a good idea to have a colleague review the test as well as you, because that way you can get a second opinion on whether the test that came back is good or not, and then you can review the test with the candidate in the next interview if it comes to that. And since we only got a minute left, I'm going to quickly skip to the next one. Listen, sometimes HR are the experts. They're the experts in understanding personality. They can tell you whether this person is a psychopath and to stay away, or if this person is going to fit into the culture. But sometimes HR doesn't understand your needs. Okay, so coordinate with them. And one important question is, do you tell the candidate why you rejected them? And this is a whole half-hour discussion on its own, which we don't have time for now. But some people ask for feedback and they can't accept it, and it could be a time drain. So just be careful of how you give feedback. And that is basically it.
I want to suggest that before you give feedback, you ask the candidate if they would like feedback, because some people can be very sensitive. You don't want to go there, and some are very eager for it. So
Yeah,
it's probably a good idea not to just do it on your own. Ask them first.
okay, good. I'm sorry that we ran out of time. I would really like to have a discussion on the last point, especially, but yeah, I have to get back to work.
Yeah.
Can we do a
I'm
follow-up?
Thank you,
I'm
Yossi.
reporting in my new role. So anyway, I left a feedback survey link, so please feel free to do it. And then, yeah, I'll see you guys next month.
Thanks for these webinars, guys. Really
Thank you.
great.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Yeah, take
Thank you
care.
very much.
All right.